Hey, what's up? It's Wick for Xiaomify, and today we are looking at the Redmi Note 9T with 5G. Yeah. Is it any good? Well, let's find out. Let's go. So here it is, and in the box we'll find a SIM card ejector tool, some instructions, a basic protective case, and below that you'll find the Redmi Note 9T, a 18 watts wall charger, and USB Type-C cable. The Redmi Note is 161 by 77 by 9 millimeters in size. It weighs in at around 199 grams. On top, it's got a 6.53-inch LCD display with a 2400 by 1080 pixels resolution and a brightness of 450 nits. On top, it's got a small pinhole selfie camera with a resolution of 13 megapixel. On the inside, it's got a Mediatek Dimensity 800U processor, and that gives this phone 5G connectivity. It's got 4GB RAM and 64 or 128 gigs of storage. Comes with a 5000 mAh battery that supports 18 watts fast charging, and it's got NFC. On the right side of the phone, it's got its volume rockers and power button, which also has the fingerprint scanner for unlocking. And on the left side, you'll find its dual SIM card slot with micro SD card, which you can use to expand its internal storage. On top, it's got the infrared or IR blaster to use it as a remote controller, and it's got dual speakers that gives you stereo sound, which is nice. On the back of the phone, you'll find its main camera setup, which might be a little bit misleading at first sight. It's got a 48 megapixel main camera with an aperture of f1.79 with a 6p lens. Then it's got a 2 megapixel depth sensor with an aperture of f2.4, and it's got a 2 megapixel macro lens, also with an aperture of f2.4, and besides that, it's got an LED flash. So the phone is pretty much the same size as most Xiaomi phones over the last year, and instead of having a glass backside, the Redmi Note 9T has a plastic back, which admittedly does feel quite nice. So let's start by looking at the camera and photos and videos, and then we'll dive into how well this phone performs. So the photos with the main 48 megapixel main camera they're quite good. During the day, I went around the block here in Shanghai, and I managed to take some pretty good shots with it. Also, when you zoom into something like this here, you can see that the details are really not 100% sharp, but they're really not all that bad. When it gets dark though, things change drastically. You can see with some more ambient light, like here on the table, it does still do quite well, but when it gets darker, the photos become grainy and overall very fuzzy. Some of these are actually quite bad. But here in the middle of the street with enough street lights, you can see that it does manage to do quite well, so when there is just a bit of lighting in that scene, it tends to come out looking a lot better. Then we can also shoot 4K video with this lens, and these videos come out quite alright. It's nothing overly spectacular, and sometimes they do look very, very vibrant or overly saturated, but it's not all that bad. On 4K though, its stabilization, or its lack of it, becomes quite obvious, and when walking, these shots are quite shaky, to say the least. When you're not walking and just do more of a steady shot or a little pan like this, the video comes out looking a lot better. When it gets darker, the video quality goes down with the sun. You can see here on the bike, it starts to get a little bit more noisy, and well, at night, the video quality isn't all that much. It's grainy, still shaky, and it doesn't come out all too well. Especially when walking, it's really not that good. Here in the car, you can see this shot is somewhat better, but during the day, you can clearly see that this same shot looks so much better. In HD, the video is a little bit more stabilized, but the difference is not that significant to always shoot in HD. Then we've got macro, 2 megapixel, and I really don't even want to talk about this one. I don't want to spend time on it because, well, yeah, 2 megapixel. Then we have a front-facing selfie camera that shoots 13 megapixel photos, and these are quite alright. During the day, these photos actually do come out quite sharp, and they're not all that bad. It can also shoot HD video, and these look quite good during the day. I've walked around with that during sundown, and the lighting and all look pretty cool, and the shots come out looking quite well stabilized, especially in this golden hour. At night, well, this one becomes more of a blurry, mushy, grainy soup.
I'm not sure, it looks quite fuzzy. During the day it wasn't that bad.
It's lacking most details and it's overall just noisy. So during the day, this one is just fine, but at night, well, not so much. And how is the phone in use, you might ask? Well, at first I was a little bit disappointed to hear that it's got a Mediatek Dimensity processor, but in normal use it's actually not all that bad. I managed to do all the daily stuff like looking at some Facebook, scrolling through my photos did quite well, and it could even handle playing some PUBG. Although that was not on its highest cinema settings, but it did play quite well, so there you go. I did a Geekbench test which really placed this phone in line with something like the Poco F1, and it had a pretty low score, but in daily use it wasn't as bad as that score might suggest. I could open up a whole bunch of apps and it still loaded all of these quite quickly. The only thing that was really noticeable is that sometimes when opening up the camera, it might take a second for the image to actually load on the screen, and you can experience some lag here. In general use, it's pretty much like you'd expect though. It's running MIUI 12 and it's got all the features that you would expect. Although some of the newer camera functions are not in this phone, as I kind of expect that these might be too much for this processor to handle, like the dual camera for example. Like it doesn't have that in the camera menu and there's no option for it. The battery life was good though. Its 5000 mAh battery is enough to last a day, and in some occasions a lot more than a day, so it did quite good with the battery life. Then the 5G speeds, they were good. I had 850 and 900 Mbps download speeds on 5G, which is quite typical here on my network in my area. I'm sure on some days it will be faster, and on some days in some areas it will be slower, but it was quite good and pretty much in line with a lot of my previous tests with other phones. So now, how is the audio? Well, let's just have a listen. You can clearly hear, as it has those dual speakers, it always gives you a much better and fuller audio experience than having just one speaker. Even though it might be two not so great speakers, having two of them creates that wider and stereo audio experience, and that really helps to make it sound better and fuller. So it's nice to see they've included that on this phone. Also, the recording with the internal microphone is pretty much like I had expected and wasn't that bad. Hey, what's up? It's Wick for Xiaomify, and this is what I sound like when I'm talking straight into the Redmi Note 9T. How does it sound? Well, let's find out. Let's go. So, overall in the audio department, it's really not that bad. So now, after having this phone for about a month, what do I think of the Redmi Note 9T? I gotta point out that at first I thought this was gonna be a rebrand of the Redmi Note 9 Pro 5G that Xiaomi has launched in China. I have it reviewed here last month on the channel. But it turned out it wasn't even close to that, so that started off with a little bit of disappointment. Then, after adjusting my expectations and finding out it had a MediaTek processor instead of one of the Snapdragons, it honestly did perform better than I had expected. The day-to-day use on this phone is just fine. I managed to do fine with all the daily tasks, and it handled a little bit of gameplay, and it also handled some slight photo editing, although it took a few seconds for it to process. The battery capacity in general is very good, and I had times where it lasted me for 2 full days, so it's actually pretty good. The photos are average, but acceptable for this phone and this price range. Video is the same. It's not very well stabilized as we might see in some of Xiaomi's higher end phones, but during the day the video was quite good. It was fine actually. The thing that's still kinda weird to me is to see these 3 lenses and that flash, which almost makes it look like there's 3 or 4 lenses on this phone, while in reality, probably just the 48 megapixel main camera is really usable. The 2 megapixel macro camera, well, not exciting. And they mostly seem to be there to make it look like it has 3 lenses, I guess. But yeah, like I said, you'll probably just use one of them. Overall, being a lower tier smartphone, it did do quite good. even though I personally would have hoped it to be closer to the Redmi Note 9 Pro series that did get launched in China, but I start to doubt that these will get an international launch though, so that's a little bit unfortunate, but for what this phone is and how much it costs, it's actually quite good. And talking about costs, the Redmi Note 9T came out in Europe last week for around 250 euros for the 4GB and 64GB storage model, and around 270 euros for the 4GB with 128 gigs of storage model. So I think these are priced quite well for what these phones are, but I'm slightly disappointed to not see some higher end specs like we had on the Redmi Note 9 Pro here in China, as that one was really impressive for its price range. Anyway, that's about it for the Redmi Note 9T with 5G. What do you guys think? Is this a phone that you want to be picking up? Are you super excited about it? Are you disappointed? Let me know in the comment section below this video what you guys think. And don't forget to leave a little like below this video to show me that you liked it. And if you don't like it, just hit that dislike button as long as you do it twice. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see my latest videos, as I'm doing a lot of videos about Xiaomi and the Xiaomi ecosystem right here on the Xiaomify channel. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see y'all soon. Peace!